Hi everyone. On April 9th, the Holy Orthodox Church celebrates the memory of the holy martyr Eupsychios. Now, Eupsychios was born in Caesarea in Cappadocia during the time of the infamous Julian the Apostate of horribly sorry memory. Julian was called apostate because he was once a Christian and yet reverted to paganism, and not only reverted, but ended up persecuting Christians as much as he possibly could. Now, Eupsychios was a man who was newly married. He took a bride, and thereafter it is said that he became aflame with zeal for Christ. Now, in those days, of course, there was a lot of ruckus between Christians and pagans. There was trouble all the time. Pagan places were destroyed. They would in turn persecute the Christians. It had also become almost like a fact of life at that time. Not necessarily a good thing in any regard, as we might see it today, but it was simply the way things were at that time, and both groups were striving for survival and dominance. This was also, of course, at a time when, particularly in Cappadocia, Arianism was reigning supreme everywhere. Well, so Eupsychios decided, once he had received this zeal from God and a desire to defend the faith as best as he could, to gather a lot of Christians who then went to a pagan temple that was dedicated to Fortuna, and they razed it to the ground. They destroyed everything there. There was not one stone left standing. Unfortunately, it was also a temple that Julian the Apostate was particularly fond of, and so he vowed revenge on those who had destroyed it. Eupsychios heard that he was in some kind of trouble because of all this, and he prepared himself by distributing almost all of his goods to the poor. Now, of course, he was still newly married, and we are not told anything about what his wife thought of all of this at the time. But he was preparing himself for the end that he knew that he was going to receive. Julian indeed did find Eupsychios, and he found many of the other Christians that had helped him in the destruction of the temple, and he took the martyr and put him on the rack. And not only the rack, but had iron claws scraped across his flesh. Eupsychios bore all of this with as much patience and godly fervor as he could, even when it said his inward parts were exposed. Yet he bore it. And finally, he was decapitated by Julian's henchmen. Julian did not stop there, however. He set a full-fledged persecution against the Christians in Cappadocia, making the priests enroll in military service, levying undue taxation on the entire populace, and doing everything that he could to destroy their spirit, which of course it did not. Julian only reigned from 361 to 362 AD, and after that he met a horrible end in a war with the Persians. But the memory of Eupsychios would not die. Once Julian had gone and departed to whatever reward was waiting for him, the Christians ended up building a church over the place where Eupsychios had been killed, and his relics were put there, which worked many, many miracles for a long period of time. In fact, St. Basil the Great, who of course was the Archbishop of Caesarea and Cappadocia, wrote many wonderful things about Eupsychios, calling him an extraordinary martyr and a man whose memory deserved to be propagated unto the ages. Now, it's a little difficult for us today to think back to those times and realize that if one of us had decided to go out and all of a sudden destroy a temple of some kind, that we would be rewarded by that from God. Yet again, as it is always difficult to judge previous times by the standards or so-called standards of our own time, we have to understand that things were indeed different back then, and that conflicts were going on all the time, and that the pagans actually were coming against the Christians with many, many horrible things for a long period of years. Paganism in those days was not what we tend to think of it as today, some sort of New Age thing or something like that. It was a violent and bloody religion that wanted completely to wipe out the Christians. So when the Christians saw a chance, they were going to retaliate. And that is what the Holy Martyr Eupsychios did. God, of course, judged him by his heart, which Eupsychios believed had been set aflame by the Lord, for the Lord, and so offered him the grace of martyrdom in the end. That sort of fervency is the type of fervency that all of us should have as Orthodox Christians in these days when the spirit of the age seems to reign supreme, and many of us get distressed and even disgusted by some of the things that we see going on around us in society. But the Lord reigns and reigns forever, and he will send this wonderful spirit of zeal to all of us who are worthy of it and ask for it and trust in him for everything in our lives. Bye-bye.